There are stories the land itself refuses to forget. You can cover them with sugarcane, build houses over them, write new prayers in their place. But the ground still hums beneath your feet. Pernambuco, 1869. The empire was dying slowly, but in the countryside, the chains still sang their same ironing. Plantations stood like kingdoms of salt and fire, where men measured their worth by how many lives bent before them. In that season, the rains had not come. The earth cracked under the sun, and the fields smelled of smoke and sweat. They said it was a curse, that the gods of Africa had turned their faces away. But curses, like memories, are never one-sided. The Casa Grande of San Miguel do Sol rose from the dust like a white wound. Its walls gleamed in daylight. But underneath, in the quarters where the enslaved slept, the plaster peeled and the air tasted of old sorrow. The master was Senor Vicente de Albuquerque, a man of iron pride and sugar wealth. He kept his Bible on one hand and his whip in the other, and he believed both were blessed by the same God. Beside him, Sinha Clarice, his wife, a woman pale as ivory and as cold as the marble saint she prayed to. And beneath them, beneath everything, hundreds of men and women who made their fortune possible, and their silence unbearable. Among them was a woman named Eulalia. Nobody knew her real age. Some said she was born in Africa, others that she was born on that very plantation. Her mother buried before her first steps. What everyone knew was that she carried something rare, a calm that frightened even the overseers. Her hands were hard, her eyes soft, and when she sang, even the dogs stopped barking. At night, she whispered lullabies in a tongue the masters called pagan, but to her, it was simply memory. Eulalia had a son, Mateus. He was her joy, her only inheritance, a boy with eyes too bright for a world so dark. She used to tell him, "When you walk, boy, the earth listens." And he did. He could find water when the ground was dry, feel storms before clouds gathered. The elders said he had axe, a force given by those who came before. But such light draws shadows. The Sinha had lost 3 children. One died of fever, one of childbirth, and one was stillborn under a moon that refused to rise. By the time she saw Mateus, something inside her, faith or madness, began to twist. "He looks like he was meant to live in this house," she said one morning. And those words were enough to unmake a world. It began quietly. First, they took him from the quarters to help in the house. Then, he slept near the kitchen, then in the nursery. And one morning, he was gone, his small hammock empty, his laughter stolen by walls too high for a mother's voice to climb. When Eulalia asked, the overseer laughed and said, "The lady took him. She said she'll raise him as her own." She stood there, hands trembling, as if the sun had gone cold. She went to the veranda where Sinha Clarice sat, fanning herself, perfume cutting to the smell of cane and blood. Eulalia fell to her knees and whispered, "He's mine, Senora, please." The Sinha didn't look at her. She only said, "He is baptized now. You should be grateful. He belongs to God." And that was the day the earth began to remember. For 3 nights, Eulalia did not sleep. She walked the fields alone, barefoot, feeling the soil beneath her like a heartbeat. She spoke to it, as her mother once had. "They took my son. If the heavens are deaf, let the ground hear me." In the distance, thunder rumbled, but no rain came. The house above her slept in comfort, unaware that something ancient had woken beneath its floors. On the 4th night, she went to kitchen and took the small shovel used for coal. She waited until every candle in the mansion had died, and then, under the cover of that still darkness, she began to dig. At first, the earth resisted, dry, stubborn, filled with roots that scratched her hands. But she kept digging, not to escape, not to hide, but to make the land remember her pain. Each handful of dirt fell with the weight of a heartbeat. Each breath she took sounded like a prayer breaking. When morning came, no one noticed the dirt beneath her nails or the faint tremor in her hands. But the ground did, and that night, when the wind passed through cane fields, It sounded different, like the breathing of something that had begun to wake. History does not always begin with fire or war. Sometimes it begins with a woman on her knees, digging not for freedom, but for memory. By the time the rooster cried again, the house above had already stolen what no empire could ever return, a mother's breath. For Eulalia, the days that followed became one long afternoon. No sunrise, no sunset, only the heavy weight of hours that refused to move. The Sinha Clarice carried the boy everywhere now. She called him Matasinho, the little angel who had replaced her grief. To the guests who visited, she would say, "God has given me back what death had taken." And they nodded, smiling, because polite cruelty was the air the rich breathed. From a veranda, the enslaved watched the charade in silence. They knew that kind of theft, not of labor or body, but of lineage. To take a woman's child was to erase her name from the world. At night, in the quarters, Eulalia sat alone. The others avoided her, not out of indifference, but fear. "Don't speak her name too loudly," they whispered. The master's ears are like snakes. They hear what they shouldn't. But the silence she carried was heavier than any punishment they could give. One evening, while serving supper in the main hall, Eulalia saw her son again. He was dressed in white linen, hair combed, skin shining under oil and candlelight. He did not see her. When he spoke, his words came out in Portuguese now, not the gentle Creole rhythm she had taught him. He called the Sinha mother. Her heart clenched, but she said nothing. If grief had a sound, it would have been that silence. That night, she returned to the spot beneath the floorboards, the one she had begun to dig days before. The soil was darker now, softer, almost as if it had been waiting. She knelt, pressed her hands into it, and whispered, "He is gone, but I am still here, so let the house know I am still here." Each night, she returned. Each night, the pit grew deeper, and as it deepened, the air inside the house began to change. Servants claimed they heard footsteps when no one walked. Doors opened with no wind. The dogs refused to enter the kitchen. And in the nursery, where Mateus slept beside the Sinha's bed, candles burned twice as fast. As if afraid of the dark, they were meant to chase away. The master, Vicente, blamed the servants. He ordered prayers, exorcisms, punishments. But the whispers did not stop. They came from below, not from ghosts, but from memory. Eulalia's digging became ritual. Not anger, not madness, ritual. She began to line the small hollow with stones, as if preparing a grave, but not for a body, for a world. One night, Rosa, an older woman from the quarters, found her kneeling in the dark, hands bleeding. "Child," Rosa said softly, "you'll kill yourself before they do." Eulalia did not look up. "I'm not killing. I'm planting," she said. Rosa frowned. "Planting what?" Eulalia smiled, a thin, exhausted smile. "Truth." From that night on, Rosa watched her. She brought her bits of food, water, sometimes a candle stub. She never asked again what Eulalia meant, because she feared she already knew. Weeks passed. The rains came late that year, but when they came heavy, a torrent that flooded the fields and turned paths into rivers. Water crept into the cellar of the Casa Grande, mixing with the soil Eulalia had disturbed. The ground groaned, walls shivered, and some said they heard something breathing below the floor. Mateus fell ill soon after, a fever that came and went like the tide. The Sinha called for doctors from Recife, but no one could explain it. The boy's skin burned at night and froze at dawn. He muttered words in a tongue no one understood, but Rosa did. She heard him whisper, "Mena, mother," the word he was forbidden to speak. Clarice began to suspect witchcraft. She accused the servants, burned their charms, threw their herbs into fire, but the fever only grew worse. On the seventh night, she summoned Eulalia. The woman entered quietly, barefoot, her face calm. The Sinha pointed at the bed. "Look what you've done, you and your dark prayers. You poisoned him." Eulalia looked at her child, small, trembling, sweat on his lips. She touched his forehead and whispered something only he could hear. For a moment, the fever seemed to ease. Then she turned to Clarice and said, "You took what was mine. Now you see what was yours was never yours at all." Clarice slapped her. Eulalia did not move. The master entered, shouted, ordered her whipped. But as they dragged her away, she smiled faintly, not in defiance, but in understanding, because the earth beneath that house had begun to answer. Over the next days, the walls cracked. The rain kept falling even when the sky was clear, and the ground would not stop trembling. Small fissures opened in the kitchen floor, the same place where Eulalia had dug. The overseer said it was bad foundation. Rosa said it was justice. Down in the quarters, the enslaved began to murmur. They spoke of a curse, of a mother's grief turned to power. But Eulalia said nothing. She sat in silence, healing her back, her hands, her rage. Because vengeance, she believed, was not noise. It was patience. And the soil, her only witness, had infinite patience. In every house built on suffering, there comes a moment when the ground remembers who it carries. The masters call it collapse. History calls it consequence. But the earth calls it balance. By the time the first cracks appeared on the kitchen floor, no one could pretend the house was simply standing on bad foundation anymore. The Casa Grande of San Miguel do Sul had begun to show its bones. Tiles shifted. Doors no longer aligned with their frames. Plates rattled on shelves when no cart passed by. To the masters, it was an inconvenience. To the enslaved, it was a sign. They had seen this before, not in stone and lime, but in man. A man who lives a crooked life eventually walks with a crooked spine. A house built on broken backs eventually leans toward the grave. Eulalia walked with a new stillness now. The whip marks on her back had healed into hard, shiny scars. Her hands, once raw from digging, had grown callous and steady. She rarely spoke, but when her eyes met the earth, it was as if they were finishing a conversation begun long before she was born. At night, when others slept, she listened. The ground made small sounds, settling, cracking, sighing. She could tell where the soil was the weakest, where the water gathered, where the house would hurt the most if it fell. One evening, Rosa came to her with a piece of bread and a look that carried both fear and awe. "I saw it," Rosa whispered. The floor lifted, just a little, like something underneath was breathing. Eulalia chewed in silence, then answered. "Everything breathes when it is waking up." Rosa sat beside her. "You're not just digging a hole, are you?" Eulalia shook her head slowly. "I'm giving the house back to the ones under it." Rosa shivered. "Eulalia, this can kill us all." The younger woman turned her gaze toward the looming shadow of the Casa Grande. Its white facade glowed faintly under the moon, like a tooth in a rotten mouth. "Rosa," she said gently, "do you know how many we've already buried so this house could live? Do you know how many nights we've died and still woken to work again? If there's a day when the house falls with us inside, then it only learned to be like us." Rosa had no answer. There are some truths that are not meant to comfort, only to be carried. Inside, the master noticed other things. Documents gone damp. A painting tilted repeatedly, no matter how often he straightened it. Mateus's fever rising whenever thunder rolled in the distance. One night, unable to sleep, Senor Vicente went down to the cellar with a candle. He followed the cracks on the wall with his fingers, digging his nails into plaster, as if he could hold the house together by force. When the candlelight reached the far corner, he froze. There, where the wall met the floor, the earth was exposed, a dark, wet wound where stones had been moved. In that soil half buried, he saw the shapes of old bones, small bones, a child's rib, a tiny jaw. He swore later that it was a trick of the light. But in that moment, beneath the house he called his, he felt something he had not felt since childhood. Fear without object. Fear that has no face, only a direction, down. The next day, he ordered the hole patched. New stones, more lime, a priest to bless the foundation, water from the church well sprinkled on the walls. But that night, the plaster fell again, and the bones, whether real or imagined, waited in the dark. Word of the cellar blessing spread through the quarters. Some laughed bitterly. Now they want to baptize the very ground. One man said. Another replied, they can bless the water. They can bless the lime. They can bless the walls. But who will bless the blood? Eulalia heard it all and said nothing. Instead, she went back to the place where she had first dug, under the kitchen, not the cellar, her space, the one the priest had not touched. She knelt and pressed her palms into the soil. It was moist now, heavy with the memory of rain. She spoke aloud, not in Portuguese, but in the language her grandmother had used, the one stolen by ships but not erased from her bones. She called on the names she remembered, names that sounded like drums and sea salt, names of those who had crossed the water in chains, only to find other chains waiting on land. If you can hear me, she whispered, if any part of you still lives in this ground, know this, they took my child, but I will not leave this house standing for their grandchildren. If I must go down, let me go down pulling it with me. The candle beside her flickered violently. A chill passed through the room, though no window was open. Outside, the wind picked up, and the sugarcane began to shake, not from storm, but from something like recognition. From that night on, things escalated. The well water turned cloudy. Livestock refused to drink. The same priest who had blessed the cellar was called again, this time to cleanse the house of malign influence. He walked through the halls with a silver crucifix, sprinkling holy water and murmuring Latin. He did not go to the kitchen. He did not go to the quarters. His God did not seem to travel that far. Rosa watched from the doorway, then turned to Eulalia. So, their priest speaks up there, she said, pointing to the ceiling. And yours speaks down there, she added, nodding toward the earth. Eulalia answered quietly. Only one of them remembers who's beneath the floor. In the nursery, the Sinha watched her adopted son sleep fitfully. Mateus's small chest rose and fell with difficulty, his breath whistling through clenched teeth. Sometimes just before dawn, he would suddenly sit up and stare at one corner of the room, eyes wide, as if seeing someone the Sinha could not see. Who is it? She would ask, shaking him. Who are you looking at? He never answered. But once, half asleep, he reached out his hand to the empty air and whispered, Maina, don't cry. Clarissa's heart twisted with a jealousy she could not name. She had taken the child, changed his clothes, his language, his prayers. Yet in his fever, he called not for her, but for the woman whose arms at first taught him what warmth was. In her rage, she did what people in power always do. When they cannot kill what they fear, she tried to erase it. She forbade anyone to speak to Eulalia. She changed the woman's work, keeping her away from the house as much as possible, away from the kitchen, away from the boy. Send her to the far fields, she ordered. Let the sun break her will. But distance means little to those who speak with the ground. In the fields, barefoot on soil that stretched all the way back to the house, Eulalia felt the tremors continue. Every time she drove a hoe into the dirt, it was like a heartbeat echoing back. She was not there to see the cracks widen, but she could feel them. Night after night, someone else took her place under the kitchen. Not a person, a force. The house groaned. Stones shifted. The wooden beams began to complain with a deep, slow creak that woke the masters in the early hours. Listen, Clarice said, clutching her shawl. The house, it's angry. Vicente scoffed, but his eyes gave him away. Men like him do not fear men. They fear what they cannot drag to court. In the quarters, the elders began to repeat an old proverb. When the mother cries into the ground, the house drinks her tears. And if the house drinks too much? A younger man asked. Then one day, an old woman replied, it drowns. Every secret has a weight. You can stack them under floors, hide them behind painted walls, press them into the earth with your boots. But pressure makes one of two things, diamonds or fractures. In São Miguel do Sul, No diamonds came, only cracks. There's a night when every lie begins to weigh too much for the roof that covers it. For the Casa Grande of San Miguel do Sol, that night came without thunder, without warning, without any sound more dramatic than with exhaling after too many years of pretending to be strong. The day had been strangely quiet. No wind, no birds near the house, only the monotonous rhythm of work in the fields, and the distant restless coughing of a child who should never have been taken from his mother's arms. By late afternoon, the air felt thick, as if the whole plantation had been wrapped in damp cloth. The sky was not dark, but colorless, a lid over a boiling pot. Inside, the Sinha Pesa nursery, Mateus lay on the bed, flushed and breathing shallow. His fever now seemed tied to the house itself. Whenever the floor creaked, his body flinched. Whenever a crack climbed the wall, his eyes opened wide, as if he could feel the structure failing above him. "Stop this," Clarice whispered, not to the boy, not to any doctor, but to the walls, the floor, the invisible presence that had turned her victory into rot. Down in the kitchen, a pot of water had been left to boil. The flame beneath it danced oddly, taller one moment, shrinking the next, reacting to a wind that was not wind, to a breath that came from the very foundation. A servant noticed a new fissure cutting across the floor, thin as a thread at first, then widening with a soft, grinding sound. It ran like a black vein, from the stove to the doorway, then toward the hall. "Chamamo fighter," someone muttered. But the fighter had no language for this kind of break. Out in the fields, Eulalia straightened slowly from her work. Her hands were around the handle of a hoe, but it was not the tool that made her stop. It was a feeling under her bare feet, a low, shuddering tremor, as if the earth had taken a deep breath and was about to speak. Rosa, working nearby, felt it too. She turned to her. "You feel that?" "Yes," Eulalia answered. "It's almost time." Rosa swallowed. "You really think the house will fall?" Eulalia did not look at her. Her eyes were fixed on the distant white walls of the Casa Grande. "I think," she said softly, "that no house can stand forever on stolen children." As the sun fell, a strange calm settled. The sky blushed lightly, but the colors seemed wrong, too muted, as if painted over ash. The master, Vicente, sat in his office, signing papers by candlelight. He had decided that, after the harvest, they would leave this place for a while, take the boy to the city, let the doctors in Recife see him, let the house rest. He thought of land as if it were an animal he could ride and dismount at will, never imagining it might one day throw him. He didn't see the crack creeping down the wall behind him, like a slow, determined lightning bolt. After supper, the enslaved returned to their quarters. But that night, sleep did not come easy. The ground made too much noise. The bed shook softly. In the distance, a dog howled until its voice broke. Eulalia did not lie down. She stood outside the quarters, under a sky that refused to glitter, listening. Rosa found her there. "If it happens tonight," Rosa whispered, "what will you do?" Eulalia's face was unreadable. "I already did," she said. "I dug. I asked. I gave the ground my grief. Whatever comes now is not mine alone. But the boy," Rosa insisted, voice trembling. "Your boy, if the house falls." Eulalia's jaw tightened. Pain flickered in her eyes, like a candle fighting the wind. "Do you think I haven't thought of that?" She snapped, then immediately softened. No fire chooses its path. No flood chooses which stone to spare. I am a mother, Rosa, but I am also a witness. She took a shaky breath. "If I could, I would pull him from that house with my own hands. But they built those walls to keep me out. Now, they will learn what it means when the only thing that can reach him is the same earth they buried us in." A deep sound rolled to the plantation then, not thunder, not distant carts, something heavier, as though an enormous weight had shifted. In the kitchen, shelves shuddered. A clay jar slid to the edge and shattered. The thin crack in the floor widened, revealing a dark, breathing gap below. The servants screamed. One ran toward the main hall. Another dropped to his knees and began to pray. The house answered with another groan. Timber straining, stones grinding. Upstairs, a painting fell, its frame splintering on the polished wood. In the nursery, Mateus woke with a strangled cry. He clutched his chest, eyes wide and unfocused. Clarice rushed to him. Sure, my angel, it's nothing, it's... Before she could finish, the floor lurched. It was slight at first, a tilt more than a drop, but enough to send the wash basin sliding, enough to make the bed legs scrape. Dust rained down from the ceiling. For the first time, the Sinha screamed. Vicente stormed up the stairs, shouting orders no one could follow. Secure the doors. Get the important documents. We'll all sleep outside if we must, but nothing is to be stolen. Even as the house shook, his first instinct was to save paper and gold. People ran in all directions. Candles fell, flames crawling where they didn't belong. Shadows wavered madly on the walls, as if the ghosts of those long buried had finally found bodies to inhabit. Out in the yard, Rosa grabbed Eulalia's arm. Come, if it falls, it will crush you from here. But Eulalia did not move. Not yet. Her eyes were fixed on the house, trying in vain to see through walls and plaster, to see one small body, one face she knew better than her own. Mateus, she whispered, as if the wind could carry his name inside. Inside the nursery, Clarice tried to lift the boy, but the floor jerked again. A sudden drop of an inch, enough to throw her off balance. She struck the wardrobe, gasping as a sharp pain shot through her shoulder. The boy rolled from the bed onto the floor, crying weakly. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound that people would remember for the rest of their lives. A long, descending crack, like a tree splitting from the inside, followed by a chorus of breakage. Part of the ceiling in the main hall gave way. Plaster, beams, and dust crashed down onto the long table, splintering it, sending plates and goblets flying like shrapnel. Screams rose from below. Servants bolted for the exits. Someone shouted that the stairs were breaking. Vicente barreled toward his office, ignoring his wife's cries from upstairs. He threw open the door, snatched the iron strongbox from beneath his desk, and dragged it toward the hall. The weight of it was obscene, a compact, dense record of every life he had converted into coin. As he reached the middle of the corridor, the floor beneath him sagged. For one surreal heartbeat, he and the chest hovered in indecision. Then the planks gave way. Man and money plunged together into darkness. The crash that followed shook the entire house. Dust belched from the open gap. A fissure raced along the wall, splitting it from ceiling to floor like a judgment written in stone. From outside, Eulalia heard that final impact and closed her eyes. So, she murmured, the house has chosen where to start. The enslaved gathered in the yard now, drawn by fear and a terrible, quiet anticipation. Some clutched rosaries. Others clutched nothing at all, as if leaving their hands empty might finally make room for something other than work. The overseer shouted for them to fetch water, tools, ladders. But no one moved. The authority in his voice had been built on the assumption that the house behind him would always be standing. Tonight it wasn't. Another section of roof collapsed, sending up a plume of dust that glowed pink in the last light of day. The grand balcony, where the master had once delivered orders and blessings, tilted and broke away from the wall, crashing into the front steps. The house was not simply falling. It was folding in on itself, like a body curling around a wound. Rosa grabbed Eulalia again. You did this, she whispered, not accusing, not praising, just stating a truth too heavy to fully hold. We did this, Eulalia corrected. Every tear, every burial, every night we stayed silent. Tonight, the silence is speaking back. But the boy, Rosa said again, voice cracking. I know, Eulalia replied. Her face finally broke, pain carving deep lines around her mouth. I know. She stepped forward toward the chaos, ignoring the overseer's shouts to stay back. When she reached the edge of the collapsing yard, where the ground had begun to buckle, she dropped to her knees once more. Just as she had the night, she began to dig. She pressed her hands to the earth, but this time, not to ask it to move. This time, to plead. If there's any mercy left in you, she whispered to the soil, take the house. Take him. Her voice shook on that word. But let the child walk out. If he must leave this world, let him at least leave these walls. It was a prayer without theology, without promise, only raw bargaining between a mother and the ground. No one heard the answer, if there was one, but a moment later, a window on the upper floor burst open, frames giving way under the strain. Through the cloud of dust and falling splinters, Rosa thought she saw a small shape stumble toward the gap, a boy's silhouette, arms reaching out. Clarice lunged behind him, screaming his name, but the window frame, already bowed, tore further away from the wall. The child vanished from view. The last of the light drained from the sky. In the end, the house did not collapse entirely that night. It half fell, half sank, its foundation sliding into the softened, rain-loosened earth. One wing crumpled into the cellar. The roof twisted, walls buckled. By dawn, the Casa Grande of San Miguel do Sol was no longer a house. It was a broken jaw of stone and wood, teeth scattered, tongue bitten. Among the ruins, they found bodies. The master, Vicente, crushed beside his strong box, his arm still wrapped around the iron. The box had survived. He had not. Servants, guests, a few overseers who had not been quick enough to flee. They found Clarice alive, trapped beneath a beam, her legs crushed. Her eyes were wild. The boy, she rasped. Find my boy. They searched, and this is where history hesitates. Some versions say they found Mateus beneath a fallen wardrobe, barely breathing, saved by the same space that had seemed to swallow him. Others say they never found him at all, only a small cloth toy, charred at the edges. In the official record, he does not exist. No line lists his name. No column counts him as lost or saved. But in the stories told later, by firesides and under trees, the boy is always there, either as a child who walked away from the ruins with new eyes, or as a spirit who refused to stay trapped in a house that stole his mother. As for Eulalia, she was not among the dead. At first light, someone saw her standing alone, at the edge of the broken foundation, looking down into the jagged mouth of what had been the kitchen, the cellar, the office, the altar of power. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her hands were bleeding again. When Rosa came to her, she asked only one question. Did we bury the house, she whispered, or did the house finally bury itself? Eulalia took a long, slow breath. We laid the ground, she said. It shows how deep. From the outside, it looked like a structural failure, a plantation house damaged by rain and time. In the reports, it was called an accident, but if you listen beneath the pages, you can hear something else. The sound of a mother's silence, turning into a fault line. Some collapses are not disasters. They are answers. Morning came slowly over San Miguel do Sol. The light did not rise. It crept cautious gray, as if the sun itself was afraid to look too closely. Mist clung to ruins. The smell of wet lime, smoke, and something older drifted through the air. The smell of earth finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The house was gone. Where white walls had once stood, there were only ribs of timber and fractured stone. A mirror half buried in mud reflected the sky, a broken heaven staring back at what man had made. The enslaved stood at a distance, silent. They did not cheer. They did not cry. Freedom, when it comes to collapse, does not sound like triumph. It sounds like breathing for the first time in years. In the fields, Eulalia walked alone. Her dress was torn, her feet bleeding, yet her steps were steady, as if every wound had taught her something about balance. She carried nothing with her. No bag, no food, no relic, only a small piece of soil wrapped in cloth. Rosa followed quietly, afraid to speak. When she finally did, her voice trembled. "Where will you go now?" Eulalia stopped beside a tree bent by the storm. She touched its bark, rough and scarred, and said, "I'll go wherever the ground lets me sleep. There's always another house waiting to remember." Behind them, men from a nearby estate were already arriving with wagons. Speaking of rebuilding, the empire did not stop for ghosts. It never did. They would raise new walls, white again, clean again, as if purity could be repainted. But the soil beneath had changed color. It was darker now, rich with the memory of what it had swallowed. No architect could build over that without feeling the ground shift beneath his boots. A few days later, they buried the dead. The priest came again, muttering the same Latin that had once blessed the house. He avoided Eulalia's eyes. Perhaps he thought she carried contagion, the kind of truth that infects the comfortable. When he finished, he sprinkled holy water over the ruins and said, "May this earth forget." Eulalia whispered back, "May it never." That night, she returned alone to the ruins. The moon was full, its light sharp against the blackened wood. She kneeled where the kitchen had been, the place she first dug, and opened the small cloth bundle. Inside was the soil she had carried. She pressed it gently into the ground, like a seed. Then she whispered, "Sleep now." The wind moved through the debris, soft, almost like a lullaby. Years passed. The empire fell. The fields changed hands. A new house rose nearby, smaller, with bright windows and tile floors. People said it was built on better ground. But the old servants knew better. They said the new walls creaked at night, as if listening. Travelers spoke of strange things. Cane growing faster near the ruins. Animals refusing to cross certain spots. Children hearing lullabies where no one sang. And sometimes, when the rains came heavy, the soil around the old foundation would soften again, as though something beneath still turned in its sleep. Rosa grew old and stayed in the region. She would sit by her doorway, telling stories to anyone who would listen. When people asked her if the story of Eulalia was true, she would smile the tired smile of those who have seen too much and say, "True? The earth doesn't lie. It just takes its time to answer." No one ever knew where Eulalia went. Some say she walked north until the river swallowed her reflection. Others say she joined a community of free people in the forest, teaching them how to make the land remember kindness again. But those who believe in symbols, and history is full of symbols, say she never left. That every time the soil trembles before a storm, that is her heartbeat still traveling beneath our feet. In the archives, there is no mention of her name. The documents call it the collapse of San Miguel do Sul, 1869. One paragraph, two sentences, house destroyed by rain, loss of property and several servants. That's how history writes its crimes, in the passive voice. But if you go there now, if you stand where the house once stood, you'll see nothing but uneven ground and a few scattered stones. Yet when the wind passes, you'll hear it, a soft hum beneath the surface, like a sigh too deep to be human. And if you kneel, press your ear to the soil, you might catch a rhythm, a slow, steady pulse, like a heart that refuses to die. History calls her enslaved. The church called her cursed. The law called her property. But the ground called her mother, because in the end, it was not a revolt, not a rebellion, but a return. The soil gave back what had been buried, pain for pain, name for name, truth for silence. And when the last brick of that house fell, it wasn't vengeance, it was balance. She didn't burn the house. She buried it, and the earth remembered her name.